Today on Mad Goblin, we fire our cameraman.
Ouch!
Hey, I'm Mike.
And I'm fired.
No, don't worry.
Oh.
No one is fired.
Okay.
We've just been thinking of different ways of streamlining our video making process.
We realized it would be so much more efficient if we could record our builds with just one person.
Freeing the other up to focus on our next project. So we went looking online for ceiling mounted boom arms, and there's not a lot of options out there, and the ones that are available are bloody expensive.
So we said, screw that, we decided to make our own.
We do all of our builds right here underneath this light. So the first thing we're going to need to do is figure out a way to clamp onto it. Then have a pivot point here so that we can get a wide degree of different angles for our film. We'd also like it to be able to attach onto a stud or a ceiling joist so that we can bring it into a garage or a different workstation. Later on too, we're going to be making an optional plate that can be screwed right into your ceiling. But that's not something we're going to really focus on today. We have this great quick release mount on our tripod. It allows for easy, seamless moving of your camera to different sections, and it'd be wonderful if we could use it for this arm. To do that, all we needed to do was bust this cap off right here. And once you do, the whole thing slides off. This is going to allow us to easily and seamlessly transition between the tripod and the boom arm, as long as we're able to perfectly replicate this portion here.
After a few iterations, we have a design we're pretty satisfied with. With only a few 3D parts needed and minimal modification to the actual arm assembly, it's pretty simple to build. While everything looks great on paper though, we're going to take this into Blender and model it in 3D. There's only so much you can account for, so by making the actual models, we can troubleshoot any potential issues we might be having. We're going to start things off by looking at part A. Now, originally we designed this much narrower, but we found that by having it wider, it created a much more even distribution of pressure, so that it wasn't focusing on one point, it could spread it out a little bit more evenly. Just to make things simple, we included a slot on the bottom so the clamp can just slide right in, and there's an optional bolt hole on there just to reinforce things if you want. Once part A and part B are assembled, you should be looking around 180 degrees of swivel. So we actually have two versions of part C. Now, the square one that you see on the bottom was actually the original design. We did print this model and we used it throughout the video. Later on, we actually did a revision, which is the round piece that you see there. It uses less plastic and it gives us a little bit more space to work with as well. So you will see later on in the video, towards the end, we do end up switching to the revised round version. All the models you see here and any revisions we do, we will be uploading to Thingiverse, so if you want to attempt to make your own, feel free to. It'll be available for download.
Now that we have our 3D printed parts done, we can start the final assembly. But before we get too carried away, we're going to need to get the rest of our material. We designed everything to work specifically with this arm. It's a microphone boom arm by Newer. You could use any scissor arm for this, but our 3D printed parts might not fit. So take that into account. We have a link to all the material used in this video in the description below. We're going to need two 632 screws, two number 6 lock washers, 8 number 6 washers, and 2 number 6 nuts. We're also going to need a single 1/4 inch bolt, 4 inches long, 2 1/4 inch washers, a 1/4 inch lock nut, or just a regular 1/4 inch nut. Now that we have all this, we can get started. First thing we need to do is disassemble this arm. We don't need the microphone adapter, so this can just come off entirely. Next, we're going to take this clamp. It's important, we're going to use it, but not this little bolt here at the end. That can go away as well. Put that aside and we'll come to it later. Next, we're going to take off all the springs. We will be using them as well. And now we get to assemble this piece here. It's designed to slide in, and to get that to work, we need to remove these bolts here. We're going to be keeping those for a different part later, so don't throw the screws out. To help support inside here, we're going to be putting some washers here, but to get them to stick, we're going to need to glue them on. Now you don't want this too tight, but you want to make sure it's secure. So give it a couple twists, but if it starts to bend or flex any of the filament, stop. This section of the hinge was printed with a sleeve so that it can slide right on top of the clamp. And that way you don't need any mechanical connection. However, if you're using a different arm, or the clamp is not like this, what we've done is we've designed a hole here that you can put a screw and thread it right through whatever clamp means you're using. You just might have to drill a hole or two on here to make that work. Again, you don't want this to be too tight, but this is still a little too loose, so we're going to tighten it up a little bit more. You want some resistance. Alright, next we're going to be attaching this piece. This is where those save screws from earlier are going to come in handy. Again, this part here doesn't have to be very tight either, but you want it to be secure. It should still have a little bit of wiggle movement to it. Next up is we have to tighten all the joints. You don't want to go too tight, but you do want to make sure that a lot of the slack has been taken out. You don't want the arm to be flopping and flailing everywhere around, especially when you're putting a 5 to 6 pound camera on top of it. So we're going to tighten all these down. And the big portion of what's going to keep this arm from flying around is going to be our springs. We're going to reuse these springs here, but in a different way. Now this becomes really critical because you don't want to go from this angle to this part. You're going to be crossing the arms to keep it from pulling down. To do this, depending on the weight of your camera, you might have to troubleshoot it and figure out which springs will work, but take a small and a big one, and you can cross them this way. And then, on this side, you'll take a long or a short one and place it here. Now that we have it all assembled and working, let's go over all the design challenges we encountered. The first problem shouldn't have been an issue at all, but we were so concerned with trying to save filament. We thought that if we had done 2 prongs instead of 3, we could have saved a lot of filament. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is every time you bend and rotate and move it, the nut would loosen from the bolt. So we had to go back and redo it with a 3rd prong.
The next issue we encountered was the model cracking here when we would tighten the screws enough to put tension on the arms. The way we remedied this was by beefing up the sides of the model here, and we accommodated for extra room to put washers on the inside.
And our last problem had to do with the camera mount piece itself. Initially, we wanted it to be able to pivot up or down without the use of the tripod mount. But the weight of the camera was so heavy, it would always make it point down regardless how tight we made it.
The way we remedied this was to print a stopper along here to prevent it from pointing downwards. Seeing how we would be manipulating the tripod mount for movement anyway, we decided to also eliminate the hinge here, making things far more simpler. And with that out of the way, we can now check out the camera arm in action.
It's very straightforward and cost effective to make your own. Hopefully this helps some of you in your video making adventures.
Until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this video, we post new ones every other Friday, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.
You can find us on social media, the links are below, and don't forget to watch our other videos for more Mad Goblin content.